I told everyone I was going hiking to clear my head. My friends, my family, even my husband. They all nodded, some with concern, others with understanding, as I packed a small backpack and left the city behind. I said I needed solitude. I didn't tell them I was running from something. Or rather, someone. I chose a trail in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place I used to visit in college when life felt simpler and my heart was less complicated. I wanted space to breathe, to think, to figure out how I ended up living a life that looked perfect on the outside but felt like a cage on the inside. I'd been married for 5 years, and somewhere between the shared mortgage and endless dinner routines, I had become a ghost in my own skin. My husband, Chris, was kind, stable, dependable, but lately when he touched me, it felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The trail was quiet, remote enough that I saw more deer than people. That was the point. I wanted to be alone. But on the second day, around dusk, I saw someone sitting on a log near the stream. He wore a worn flannel, his boots muddy, a thermos in his hand. He looked up when I passed, gave a nod, and said something about the weather. I returned a polite smile and kept walking, but I felt the weight of his gaze long after. That night at my campsite, I couldn't shake the image of him. Maybe it was just the isolation playing tricks on me, but his face kept surfacing in my mind. He was younger than me, late 20s maybe. Scruffy in a way that suggested he spent more time in the woods than behind a desk. I told myself to let it go. The next morning I saw him again. This time he caught up to me on the trail. "You staying long out here?" he asked casually, as if we were just two travelers in the same orbit. "Just a few more days," I replied, not quite sure why I answered at all. "I'm Tyler," he said, offering his hand. "Leah." We didn't talk much, but we walked together for nearly 2 miles. It wasn't like flirting. It was something quieter, familiar, like finding an old song you'd forgotten you loved. When we reached the fork in the trail, he nodded goodbye and went left. I went right. But my thoughts didn't follow me. They stayed with him. That night it rained. My tent leaked at the corners and I was cold. Around 10 p.m. I heard a voice outside. His voice. "Hey, you okay in there?" I didn't answer at first. My heart raced. What was he doing here? Why did it make me feel something I hadn't felt in years? I heard the weather turned worse up here. Thought I'd check in. I set up not far from here. I unzipped the tent. He stood there, damp and backlit by his headlamp. "You want a fire?" he asked. I nodded, wordless, and stepped out into the rain. We built one together under the cover of a rocky outcrop nearby. It was warm, the only thing warm in miles. We sat close, knees almost touching, and talked about everything but the obvious. He told me he used to be in the military, that he came to the mountains every few months to reset. I told him I was married, that I was just trying to find clarity. He didn't flinch. He just nodded like he understood more than he was letting on. "I wasn't looking for anything," I said, the words slipping out before I could catch them. "Sometimes we find things anyway," he replied. I didn't kiss him. He didn't kiss me. But something passed between us, electric and heavy, and when I finally walked back to my tent, I felt like I'd crossed a line I didn't fully understand. The next morning he was gone. No note, no goodbye. Just the memory of firelight and the way he looked at me like he saw all the things I tried to hide. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into a stranger's kindness. But it lingered. When I returned home, everything felt off. Chris greeted me with a hug and a glass of wine, and I tried to fall back into the rhythm. But I had changed. Or maybe I had finally noticed how much I'd already changed. I didn't tell Chris about Tyler. Not really. I mentioned I met someone on the trail briefly, left out the fire, the late-night visit, the pull I couldn't name. But even the omission made my chest tighten with guilt. The next few weeks were a blur of normalcy. Laundry, work, dinner, silence. Chris tried in his own way to connect. But I couldn't shake the feeling that part of me had stayed behind in those woods. Not because of Tyler exactly, but because for the first time in years I felt seen. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was recognition of something I'd lost, something I'd traded for comfort and security. One night, I dreamt I was back in the mountains. Tyler was there, silent, standing at the edge of a cliff, and I was trying to reach him. But the trail crumbled under my feet. When I woke up, Chris was asleep beside me, his hand resting lightly on my hip. I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many more dreams I'd have to wake from before I started telling the truth, to him and to myself. I didn't cheat. Not in the way people mean when they say that word. But I did something else. I felt more in those 2 days than I had in years. I longed. I imagined. I wished. Is that worse? I don't have a dramatic ending. There was no confession, no tearful breakup, no affair. Just a woman walking through the woods, trying to find her way back to something real, and discovering that the realest thing she'd felt in years was with someone who vanished like morning fog. I still think about Tyler sometimes. Not because I loved him, but because he reminded me of a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. A version who wanted more than just stability, who craved wonder, who still believed in mystery. And maybe that's the real infidelity. Not with another man, but with the life I promised myself I'd live.